This episode of This Agile Life has been brought to you by BrilliantAgile.com, providing Agile and Scrum training, consultancy, and personnel.
BrilliantAgile.com. Done right, it's brilliant.
Recorded on Wednesday, November 6, 2013 in St. Louis, Missouri. This Agile Life, Episode 23, Overloading Yoga Positions. Welcome to This Agile Life, a podcast about what it's like to be agile in the real world. Hello, everyone. I'm the host of This Agile Life, John Sextro, and joining me today are my two co-hosts. Starting off with number one, Mr. Jason Tice.
Hi, John. How are y'all doing?
Jason, I'm doing wonderful. How are you this evening?
Yoga night. So we're doing the podcast post yoga practice, which is awesome. Since lots of funness we might talk about later.
Very good. I'm pleased, very pleased that you were able to join us after your yoga evening, and you're not like twisted up into a big knot or anything. You look nice and relaxed and smoothed out.
Wonderful.
My number two co-host tonight is Dr. Lee McCauley. Lee, how are you tonight?
I am doing well and definitely relaxed because I did not do any yoga.
Oh my goodness. So this is, and of course Amos isn't here, but you know what? We just have to get into it because if you don't know, and knowing that the most governed portion of our podcast is picks, so which we do at the end, forget that policy. I'm going to start now. Yoga is a very agile practice. It's all about iterative practice, small experiments, and learning and embracing feedback from your body. If you've never tried it, you owe it to yourself to experience it and then form your own opinion.
I get feedback from my body all the time, but it's generally not. It's other sounds that my body just shouldn't be making.
Really? Well, at least since our paths occasionally cross, since we work together, we'll have to take that into. We'll see if we can provide you with a yoga experience for which then you could provide commentary.
Yes, that would be wonderful. And not joining us tonight is Amos King. He's under the weather and not feeling well, so we will miss him, but we will get him caught up on a future episode of This Agile Life. And we do want to get the famous pairing back together with Jason and Amos, because it feels like there's a new Jason in town. And
the backlog of debate items has evolved. So yes, and if you haven't been following the feed on Twitter, Amos and Jason agree actually on no estimates. And when Amos is here, we'll have a little follow up discussion about some no estimates thoughts and some of my personal experiences from my no estimates journey. We want to get Amos in on that, but there's lots of other things that Amos and I still have some differences of opinion on that we'll touch base on in future episodes.
I'm sure our listeners are very deeply teased by that and are going to look forward to those conversations. I know they're always a lot of fun on the show. Before we get started in our discussion topics tonight, I want to give a special listener shout out to Andy from photostories.cc and at photostoriescc on Twitter. Amos and I have been having a very nice conversation with Andy about his agile journeys and the some of his unique perspectives and some of the unique things that he's dealing with on his project and on his team. And it was nice of Andy to reach out to us on Twitter and ask some questions and tell us about the things that he likes on the show, as well as, guys, he went out to iTunes and gave us a rating on iTunes. So that's exciting, and I would encourage any of our...
We have at least one listener.
We definitely have at least one listener, Lee. Yeah. As long as he's not a bot. There's always that possibility.
I'll take bots.
Yeah. Bots are good. Lee's a big robot guy, so he likes bots.
I'm ready for the robots to take over.
But I think Andy's a real guy, and he seems like a really great guy. And I appreciate him reaching out to us on Twitter. And I'd like to encourage any and all of our other listeners to talk back to us on Twitter. We have a Twitter handle at This Agile Life. And if you feel so inclined, we would love it if you'd give us a rating on iTunes and tell us what you think about the podcast. So that's our listener shout out. Let's go ahead and get started, guys, with our discussion this evening. And we have one main topic that we're going to discuss. And this one is really one that is near and dear to my heart. It's one of the things that I think makes good teams better and can also make good teams great. And it's the concept of role overloading. So when I say role overloading, guys, what do you think of?
Well, I always think of having particularly the tech lead or the team lead, and they're trying to be the program manager as well as the product owner in some cases, and just being torn in multiple directions. And torn is probably the right way to put it.
So Lee, your explanation or your what comes to mind with you is something that's a little bit more negative, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I kind of take a technical viewpoint to say that, a lot of times I've seen people say they're doing role overloading when they have a primary role on the team, but then because of either, the team isn't fully staffed, they may have to step into another role from time to time. And the challenge to what Lee kind of said is if they do that, how are they ensuring they're being effective at both roles?
That's an excellent point, Jason, and it's something that we definitely should talk more about. Jason, if you remember back to episode 21 when you and I spoke last, you mentioned the idea of the T-shaped person or the T-shaped skills profile where somebody has a set of skills that they're very proficient in. They have a deep set of skills there, which is the vertical axis of the person, right? And then the horizontal is those other skills that the person has that ultimately comprises that T-shaped person.
So that put this way, if you have that profile, it enables you to support some level of role overloading. And in a perfect world, I'll share this since this is a fall episode and probably 90% of the business world is out there doing their self-assessments and performance appraisals. That's a great goal to shoot for, to say that you can support different hats or different functions within a team. But I'd coach you to be realistic with that. You can't do everything overnight. And on top of that, it's statement sometimes is you're the jack of all trades with the master of none. If you have that as your profile, will it allow you to be successful? That's a case-by-case basis, just something to be mindful of.
Right. And of course, that's ultimately what I think of and what I was shooting for when I mentioned the topic of role overloading is more the concept of less so from the perspective of some sort of a negative where someone is trying to take on too much responsibility, and hopefully more of a positive where it is members of the team that are willing when they are able and are able to help fill in some of the blanks or fill in some of the maybe the dead space when they have downtime or when the team is extra busy in a certain area of the project or of the team. So those people role overload and help out in the areas where maybe they would not have otherwise, strictly speaking, by the title of their role.
Yeah, but see, this is where, in as much as I guess I'll be the realist here, and maybe Lee will chime in here. This is all fine and good. And yes, we want to have T-shaped people who can step up and support other challenges. But how do you sustain this? And you don't have a team that falls in the pattern where there's one person that always steps up, that always writes the release notes, that always does other stuff. And this idea of allowing role overloading, because you're allowing the team to self-manage and set up their own boundaries, doesn't become a way that someone always becomes, responsible for one duty or one task.
I think that actually brings up a really good point, and that I was thinking of while John was talking, is that I think the term role overloading is maybe the wrong way to look at it if or what John is really advocating here. I think it confuses the whole issue. The whole issue is really about tasks that the team needs to accomplish. Now, typically, we have grouped those into certain roles on teams, and we've labeled them. But the labels could be counterproductive in this case. I think if you simply talk about these are the things that have to get done, now how do we do those as a team? If you simply talk about it that way, I think you're more likely to have successful role overloading, like has been defined.
Well, and see the way that I say you can cut through, I guess, some of the human factors and human challenges. I mean, this to me is a Kanban 101 application where the team's got these things they have to do, put them on write them down, put them on a board, and then somehow come up with a process that the team gets that stuff done. And ideally, it doesn't become where there's a person that always has to do those things and they can somehow be shared across the team. You guys think that works?
I think that adding specific tasks to a Kanban board that are not directly story related is dangerous and needs to not work.
And to clarify, Lee, I would have a separate board. So you're on a dev team, you got a dev story, but then there's there's all the other stuff, and I've actually worked with teams, they call it the project management board, and maybe because they don't have a project manager, they either think they need to do or they've been told they have to do, like release documentation. And so they put it there to ensure it gets done. But the pattern I see all over and over again is it always just becomes one person's job to do that board, and you never see that the team embracing the tasks on that board at the same level of ownership that they take to the stories for software development activities.
That's because Agile in the real world, since we're all about Agile in the real world, is really about habits. It's not about practices. It's about what habits the team gets into and just does as part of their everyday life. And if you have something that is not part of their everyday life, the team is not going to do it as well. Sure, people will step out and say, oh, we got to do this, and they'll do it, but it won't be something that's done well, and it won't be something that's done regularly unless you've created a habit out of it. So if you can work that into the everyday schedule, the everyday process, that those things become part of of what they do every day, then I think it'll work. But I just don't think it'll work unless you've got something like that.
For a moment, I'd like to take this discussion just down a brief side trail and take this out of software development for a second and take it to manufacturing and the concept of lean manufacturing, where you have many workers. Those many workers are distributed throughout a production assembly line, typically. And if I am the wheel guy today, and my job is maybe that's my typical job is to attach the wheels and align the wheels and do all these things relative to the wheels. But today we've got more than enough people to handle the wheels section of the production line, but we don't have enough people to handle the steering wheel assembly portion of the line. And I've had training on attaching steering wheels, and I've attached steering wheels before. It's not what I'm really great at, but it's what my team, quote unquote team, needs. It's what the company needs at the moment is for somebody to help attach steering wheels. So I will, in the context of our discussion, role overload and stop attaching wheels today, and I'll move over and work on attaching steering wheels.
That's all well and good, but I am more likely than the guy that normally attaches steering wheels to have a mistake, because I don't do this on a regular basis. I don't do this every day. So I miss one piece of the process that I just forgot about from my training. I'm more likely to do that. I am not going to attach steering wheels as well as the guy that normally does it.
But so we're kind of like, John, what you're describing is something that goes against the whole mindset of, the T-shaped person, in that you're talking about a role where you could assume that there is a certain amount of skill involved. And if you don't have those skills and you try to perform that role, you're operating at risk. So that's just not a good idea. The problem, though, is then how do you manage that without creating a culture of heroism, where you're going to find people who are going to break the rules, disregard roles, and do whatever they need to do to be successful. And they may or they may not be rewarded for that.
Do you think then, Jason, based on what you said about, and Lee as well, that I'm not good at attaching steering wheels? Is it better for the company, better for the team, better for the project, the organization, for us to not be able to attach steering wheels today, or for me to have to ask for some help and maybe get some extra direction to allow me to get up to speed to attaching steering wheels to a point that is sufficient quality for the job?
I think it's useful, and whoever is running that team or that assembly line needs to be able to make the judgment as to whether they're willing to accept the risk. So you are incurring some risk. The risk will go down as those people get experience in that area. And if you're willing to move them around enough where they have experience all the time, but I still think that anything that's out of their normal pattern is going to be done worse, or you have a higher probability of errors than something that you don't.
Yeah, Lee, I agree totally. But again, to kind of level set, really with John's example, which he did couch as a manufacturing scenario, and even to say software, is to say, okay, here comes the architect, take a step back, look at the big picture, and really confront reality and embrace it. That being that if you're in manufacturing, you're going to have quality controls in place, and you're going to know if you're being successful. So, and at that juncture, you have feedback. From that feedback, you can make adjustments. So maybe John steps up, he tries to help out, he all of a sudden starts failing the line, and they can intervene. The same is true for if you're truly following the engineering disciplines in Agile software development. If someone's trying to shift over, you got a new guy on your team, he may not know what's going on. Well, if he starts breaking the build, you've got some feedback that you could leverage to figure out how do we improve and how do we stay focused on the prize.
Just to follow along with the manufacturing example, if I start introducing defects, right, somebody pulls the andon cord, or I pull the andon cord and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here with this. I'm not sure I've got the steering wheel attached right. To take this back to software development then, and I think both of you guys have played the game Get Kanban, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, including version 4 where our friend Carlos becomes an architect.
Oh, wonderful. I'll have to.
Yes, he goes from QA, he got promoted. He's an architect now. If you haven't played the new version, it's awesome.
All right, don't give away Carlos, Jason, because maybe some people...
Carlos is the best. All I can say. He's awesome.
Maybe they're not familiar with Carlos. I feel sorry for Carlos sometimes.
He becomes an architect. He's awesome.
I really feel sorry for Carlos.
I thought he was talking about Assassin's Creed 4. I thought that was...
So taking it back to the game of Get Kanban, there are 3 sets of dice in the game. As you'll recall, there's a set for the designers, for the developers, and the testers. And the game promotes role overloading. Would you agree?
Well, sure, because you can change out any die you want to. For what? There's a slight penalty on that. I forget what it is.
You get half the productivity.
You get half the productivity. That's what it is. Yeah. But that's life. And if you're okay, I think that your analogy, John, to lean manufacturing is a great analogy, but it's a little off kilter. I mean, that's manufacturing. It's a systematic process. It is not knowledge work. So when you go into the knowledge work space, which Agile software development is due to complexity theory, things change, and the processes and the people that support those processes have to be a little bit more dynamic so they can react to change, because lots of stuff happens that isn't controlled. So I think that that's good. And actually, I think the game does a great job of saying that, yes, okay, if I'm a QA person, I can write tests. I'll go figure out how to do it. I'm not going to be as good as someone like Lee, who's, on the keyboard 8 hours a day cranking it out, but I could help. I could add some contribution. I think that's good, but I think you need to keep those changes in context with the big picture. You need to look at some metrics to make sure that if someone does do that, the overall team is still being effective.
Right. So we wouldn't just pull resources. We wouldn't just pull people from a job that they're doing very well and put them onto a job that they can't do as well for fun. We would only do it in the situation where the situation and the role and what's going on necessitates that.
Yeah. But I think the key thing to acknowledge, though, is there are some safeguards that you should put in place to minimize risks associated with role overloading. First and foremost, talk about some baseline metrics so that if someone does change their role temporarily, really for something, if there's something that needs to get done, so that the team can continue to operate without incurring additional risks or even maybe technical debt that they don't know about.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up question about the metrics. How are you going to use those if it's a short period of time? And I mean, what are the metrics that you're going to put in place to determine whether or not me, as a stereotypical developer, if I role overload to help clear out the queue of tests that need to be written or testing that needs to be accomplished at the end of my sprint, or based on where the cards are on the Kanban board, what metric am I going to apply?
Well, I would talk, when I say baseline, I'm assuming that you have, a team should have, I'll use the term, a multi-dimensional measurement system, in the sense that we're looking at things like cycle time that measure delivery. We're looking at things, escaped bugs, test results, test coverage that measure quality of code, or we can assume they measure quality of code. Use a tool like Sonar, measure your technical debt using the heuristics that it runs against your code and static code analysis. Look at all of that data, and then, again, look at the trends. So we're not saying, okay, what percentage of the code is tested? What percentage of the builds are successful? What are the trends? Is the trend going upwards or downwards? And is that good or bad?
Well, I hear Mr. Prescriptive Guidance leaking back into the conversation here.
Oh, we love metrics over here. And that's where I think that, again, my simple takeaway for this is it really goes back to the need to ensure that if you are practicing Agile, you want to get the benefits from allowing, from a team to be able to really leverage role overloading for strategic surges or whatever the objective is. But you have to have the engineering disciplines in place. You have to have the metrics in place. And then at that juncture, you can role overload while at the same time you are still effectively managing risk.
Lee, what do you think about the metrics helping us effectively manage risk in a scenario like this?
I think metrics, I'm not quite as gung-ho on metrics as Jason is. Not because I don't think they're useful. I just think that often the task of gathering the metrics is not done in a way that is efficient or helpful to the developers. So this is one of my little pet peeves, that we should be gathering metrics that really have a purpose, as opposed to just gathering a bunch of metrics and hoping at some point in the future that we might use them.
Well, and this is where I think, from an enterprise standpoint, all this stuff we're talking about, this is the theme of my day today with even stuff at work. We were talking about the stuff that, I was like, time out. This is hard to do. I mean, you're doing development, you've got to write software, you've got to deliver it to a client, whoever, you got to get that done. At the same time, now, you got to write tests, you got to do all this, technical work. This is where some standardization can provide some value to say that, hey, if you're in a dev shop, here's the standard way we run a project. You can enhance it if you need to, or if a client asks you to, but out of the box, you get some level of metrics that are designed to help a team be successful. And a team need not come online and have to recreate the wheel every single time.
I totally agree with that. I wish we did more of that at our company. We do some of that, and we encourage metrics a lot, but we don't have a standard package, and we don't have things that are kind of out of the box. We know how things are going to work. We're kind of moving more in that direction, but it's a long road.
It's tough. Well, again, like I was saying, it's hard. And on top of that, so to me, that's saying that there's this idea of, Agile as a process, and it's an open, sorry, it's really not a process. That's this thing called Scrum that we love to talk about. But to be fair, that's what the Scrum guys have done really well. And the whole alliance between the Scrum Alliance and the Project Management Institute, the PMI folks, there's a lot of value there, because all these PMI guys, they get metrics. You go to get your PMI cert, they'll talk about all these different ways, how to quantify the project management triangle and all the fun stuff they teach you at PMI school. Well, the Scrum guys are smart. They looked at that and they said, hey, let's build processes and tools that will generate those metrics. And that's a sellable product. And so, and to the credit of the vendors out there that have aligned to that, that's awesome. That's a great business model.
Oh, the PMI marriage with the Scrum certification thing is the biggest farce in the history of software development.
John, I am sure if you were in that club,
tell it, John. Tell it.
Come on, John. Again, I would give them credit from a business perspective. They saw an opportunity. They saw a large group of people that have a specific skill set, and they said that, hey, we can figure out a way to take this kind of very open thing called Agile. We can give it a name called Scrum, and then we can sell it to those people. And you can that's a great business. That's a business. And there's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with making money.
Yeah. So I'm sure if you had that idea, John, or I had that idea, and we were laughing all the way to the bank, that would be awesome. There's nothing wrong with that too. So I'm going to get all kinds of hate mail from the Scrum guys, but it makes a lot of sense.
I thought you were friends with the Rally people, Jason.
Well, Rally's a great tool, but Rally out of the box, you need to make an investment to learn the Rally way. And there are ways to, even using their APIs, you could evolve the Rally way. I mean, Lee, I'm working on a project with you. We use Rally. They have an API. We extract a whole bunch of data out of Rally. We generate some crazy reports that align to the way that we've used the tool, and they allow us to measure risk. There are ways that we could, follow the Rally way, the Rally book. They wrote their own book. It's out there. You can buy from Amazon. If you follow that exactly, then the tool just works. But you don't have to do that. But the key thing is, if you don't align to a tool, then sometimes you have to do a little bit of extra work. And to your point, Lee, who does that work when you've already got a bunch of other stuff to do?
Hey,
it's got to be something that's part of the process, and it's got to be something that is practically automatic, if not automatic.
Yeah. Well, I guess my thing, and again, you guys know I kind of have a different viewpoint from looking at the enterprise, is I cannot emphasize the value of, even if you're a developer, really look at the big picture. So even if you're writing code, where is that code going? Who's going to sustain that code after that app goes to prod? Is that something that you're going to do? Is it something that you're delivering the code to someone else and they're going to sustain? And if you start asking yourself those questions and think about the big picture, sometimes it will impact the way that you may choose to do things.
I want to bring this back around to role overloading, because I think we've gone off in another rabbit trail.
Yes, we certainly have.
Jason, if you have friends at the Rally company, I'd like you to put me in touch with them so I can try and sell them commercial space on this podcast.
Really? Yeah, let's see about that.
So we can
I would rather put you in touch with my friends at LeanKit, because I think their tool just rocks.
Well, yeah.
LeanKit is awesome.
I'd love to have them as well. Maybe we can have a bidding war over who gets to buy commercials on.
I think we should just endorse things for free, because that's fun.
Yes, but it doesn't pay the bills.
Oh.
So let's bring it all back, because we started talking about metrics to make sure that as we are doing role overloading, that we're making sure that we're keeping the same standards of our development up, the quality of our development, of our testing up. And I just have to say that for the simple cases of helping fill in gaps and helping swarm on a team, I don't think don't get me wrong, I like metrics when they're automatically collected for me, but you don't need those to do role overloading.
No, you don't. A great story about this. Actually, it's a great story that involves Lee. So once upon a time, though, this past summer, Lee went on vacation. Yes, Lee went on vacation for a week. And Jason was left around. And Jason kind of helped fill in, did some rollerblading, kind of helped serve as a tech lead for a week. And this is a very funny story because we have Jason's actually going to sit and figure out how to integrate a new data store into an application. And because I've actually used the data store and other people hadn't experienced it. So we all work together. And to your point, John, there's a great ability for innovation there. So I think that, I would encourage everyone to ensure they have things in place so they can seize the strategic opportunities that role overloading provides if that comes up. Or again, the case when Lee was on vacation, we had a requirement to integrate with the new data store. Other people hadn't experienced it. I actually had. So I'm like, well, I know how to run the data store, get that up and running. You guys can figure out the APIs to integrate it with our application. And together we can do a spike on that and all be successful and actually have a lot of collaborative learning in that whole process.
What Jason left out of that story is that he scared the crap out of my team on the Friday before I came back.
That was a present, Lee. That was awesome. And then, of course, I was gone at the Agile conference the next week, so you can deal with you can deal with the fallout from that. So,
did he offer them like a horse head or something as a sacrifice?
No. They swarmed on something, and that was not something they were prepared to do.
We went, and I got out, and Lee, you did not live the story. There's the opportunity to write the second version of the Phoenix Project out of what happened when you were on vacation this summer. That is that I got out my 1997 vintage personal software process. Does anyone know the PSP?
Negative.
Interesting. You guys, you can borrow my book and read the personal software process.
I think I've still got a PSP book around here someplace.
Well, it was the one. It was funny. For when I did my undergrad, it was the only software methodology I actually learned where I went to college, and that was the only one. They thought it was the best, and I was like, look where we've come to these days. So we made an action plan with a checklist, all the stuff you did in the PSP. But then instead of doing it as a personal project, we did it as a team. So, we kind of had milestones that were very small. I mean, and there were a lot of Agile elements in the PSP. It just didn't really ever talk about how to collaborate, which, okay, we can debate that later on. Or I will challenge my co-host here to go read enough of the personal software process book that we can debate it. And actually, you can put it side by side with Agile. And there's a couple of interesting discussions you could have from that. But
would you say that you had then, Jason, a positive experience with role overloading?
Well, so here's the question, John, and maybe this takes us into a little different discussion here. When do you draw the line between role overloading and just having a mob?
A method of procedure?
No, a mob, like the mob programming or swarming. I know
a mob.
Yeah, mob programming. So mob programming.
I'm not sure that's really synonymous, are they?
Well, I think they're different, but they can get you into the same place, because if you're able to role overload, the whole idea of a mob is everyone's working together. So technically, then everyone's working as all the roles combined together. I think you've overloaded them.
You're talking about like just this giant blob of protoplasm.
You're talking about overloading in the same way that I blow a circuit in my house when I plug up my particle collider.
Wow,
well, kind of.
That just went way over my head.
Well, okay, so if you want to do mobbing, and mobbing, to its credit, has become a documented practice. I mean, there are companies out there that all they do is mob. Everyone comes in all day. You sit in the conference room. You pass the keyboard around. To effectively do that, you really have to be a T-shaped person, because when they pass the keyboard to you, if the mob is writing a test, with the contributions from your fellow team members, you better know how to write that test, or kind of drive that effort. So if you're in a mob environment, I could propose it might actually make you more preconditioned to be able to support role overloading.
Okay, let's define what this mob environment is. And can you give an example of what you mean by mobbing?
I think you could ask Google for people who haven't seen it, but the whole idea of mob programming is it's a team that, you go one team, 5 people, one keyboard that everyone shares. So
wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good time for a nap.
Well, it's out there. At the Agile, John, you were talking about the Agile conference this past year. They talked about it at the Agile conference. Some guys presented on it. I think for something like a spike or a short spike, kind of like the infamous thing that happened that Lee talked about when he was on we talked about when Lee was on vacation, where we had some critical information deficiencies on the team. So we had people that knew the API, people that knew the data store, but those people didn't overlap. Then, let's all get together and let's do a mob session for a couple hours to kind of get the collaborative juices flowing. I think that could be effective. If that's what you did every day to write your software, I don't see how that could be effective personally, but that's my opinion.
I haven't experienced mob work, and I haven't done that before. So I can't speak personally to it, but I know that there are organizations such as GitHub, and Automatic, which does WordPress, I think, where there are people that they come in and they don't have like a title, and even some of them don't have a project. So they come in and it's like, well, what do I want to work on today? And there's some process by which they pull work and they do that work. And it could be that they're working on testing that day. It could be that they're doing development work, but there's no real rhyme or reason necessarily to it. It's just kind of like, well, what do I feel like doing today? Maybe more than what do I feel like doing, it's what would be the best thing for me to do for the company.
Well, let's do this. How about this to better constrain this discussion? Because I think we've kind of run into this now where this idea of mobbing, which, you go to mobprogramming.org, it's out there on the internet, to the point that they have like training sessions on how to facilitate mob programming with like Llewellyn Falco facilitating them. I'll write something that we can debate for fun. And maybe you have an opportunity to experience it. Lee has the opportunity to work with some folks who experienced it when it was facilitated, maybe positively or negatively by yours truly, for which we could probably debate if it was effective, and or maybe call it an experiment and say, if we were to do that again, or a lot of teams that are kind of doing more product development work have developed cadences where they might do mobbing, for a few hours every few weeks. So every 2 weeks, they take Friday afternoon, they have a mob, and they kind of bust something out as a team, working on it together. I see a lot of potential creative benefits for that when it's used from time to time. And I think it is somehow in that case related to role overloading, because it means at that time people take the role that they might have and they put it aside and they say, for this moment, we are all working together as one single group, that in that single group, we are supporting all of the roles within the team that the team needs to be successful.
I just think that there are all sorts of metaphors for efficiency and productivity that are littered throughout nature, industry, and in all cases, it seems like what works the best and what ends up having the highest productivity is this mutual agreed plan that we will all do whatever is the next most important thing that will benefit the group, as opposed to just strictly and in a very prescriptive way, will only do work that comes into my queue or falls into my very, very narrow definition of what my job is, or happens to fall into the very narrow set of skills that I was hired to perform on the team.
So John, let's take the antithesis of that. So I think we spent a lot of time talking here about, the perfect scenario where everyone's there, everyone's committed to the goal, everyone's working together, and all of the roles are being supported. I previously mentioned the idea of what happens if you have a role that, for whatever reason, isn't being supported. What do you do?
I have a role that, like, let's say I don't have a developer on my team. I only have a BA and a tester. then what do I do?
What happens?
I don't really have much of a team at that point, have I? I mean, my team is not 100% intact.
Can we take it a little differently? Because I think that it's hard to have that discussion if you take the developer out of the picture. Take the BA out of the picture. What happens?
Again, I think that if let's say that I have a BA, but they're completely allocated, or let's say I have a developer, but they're completely consumed, because what I think you're speaking of, or what you're talking about, is really a broken situation where my team is not fully put together. So let's say we have a full team, but a member of the team is out sick or is otherwise 100% allocated, and we have something really of high priority that needs to be done by that person. If someone else is less than 100% allocated, what I'm saying is the best practice, is the best thing to do, is for that person to roll overload, and even if they're not great at it, to take on that task and advance it. Advance it as much as they can with the skills that they have to the level of quality that they can perform on that task, on that job.
That's fair. I mean, and maybe I think you're right. My scenario is a little bit more symptomatic. And put it this way, role overloading can only fix some problems. So if you have a team that is missing a role for whatever reason, there will be a limit to what you can, the problems the team can come by overloading roles, to what you said about you'll be able to only advance it to a certain point, and that certain point may not actually meet all of the acceptance criteria.
Yeah, and I think there is some danger there. I mean, not as much with. I'll give you a situation that I thought of here, and so I'm exaggerating tremendously, but if I'm getting my gallbladder removed, I'm pretty sure I don't want role overloading from the nurse.
Oh, come on. The nurse is going to go in and be the surgeon. That's going to be awesome, Lee. You're going to have an awesome outcome.
Right. So granted, I'm not saying that that software development is like that, but it's just a softer form of that. So yes, I totally agree. You can, as much as you can, push something forward with the skill sets and with the people you have. But you may end up having to rework some of that stuff. We've had issues with that on our team, where, and it's not even people, these are people that should have been able to roll overload. And they just have different skill sets.
So let me ask my friend who hates process and hates to attempt to guide human behavior with prescriptive guidance question. That is, of course, the one and only Lee. What do you think about, so to me, I think, John, this idea of role overloading, it's something that's shouldn't be an everyday occurrence. It's something that you have to do when duty calls for it. So is that something that you should keep track of? Is it something that a team should talk about in terms, like from a retrospective, like, hey, why did we have to do this? What went wrong? And use that as a way to chart improvements? Or is that just crazy process and dumb metrics?
I think that's exactly what you should do. If you're having to go outside of the normal habits, I love that word, of your process, then you do need to discuss it in a retro and say, well, what happened? Why wasn't our process good enough that we could do role overloading as part of the process and we didn't have to do it as an exception?
Okay. We know that I'm trying to get to the point that this idea of saying that, hey, we're overloading roles is more of an exception condition. And by that nature, it isn't always necessarily positive.
So I agree. And I would take that one step further and say that anytime someone has to go outside of their normal comfort zone or just their normal day-to-day process, they are going to naturally be a little bit insecure. Security is what makes people happy in their job, in their life. And so we have to do that sparingly. Sometimes it's really good. You go on a roller coaster you get your blood pumping, and good stress, but you don't want it all the time. That could cause harm.
Better yet, do yoga, get your blood pumping. There we go. Stand on your head for 5 minutes like I did tonight. Crazy stuff happens.
Put your put your head in your. Never mind.
Oh, you did. I guess the only thing that I would say, and the only thing that I kind of heard in that lead that I'm just a little concerned about is, so what about the idea of taking risks, trying controlled experiments to facilitate improvement or learning?
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
So I think that almost goes against my idea to say that, you know what, maybe some idea of role overloading is actually good because it's going to force people to do that and it's going to force them out of their comfort zone. But you can do that in a controlled manner. Does that mean that we should put up a role overloading chart and we can track that? I love that idea. I can imagine some teams might love it. Some other teams might not.
If you can do it automatically.
No, I think there's a thing called a big piece of paper. You hang it up on the wall, you put a marker by it, and you can track it. And you're laughing, but what's funny is, again, human nature, that's something that people can look at and they can celebrate and they can reflect on. If you don't write it down, people lose track of it, and then you have nothing to talk about to say, hey, what did we learn? What did we try? Well, I don't know. So I don't know. I see value in that. We can debate that. And I think that for the amount of time it takes to put a piece of paper on the wall, write everyone's names on it, put a black marker by it so people put tick marks on it, I think there's a value that comes from that.
And if there's a time box for when that experiment is taking place and the team completely understands that and is buying into that experiment, then I am all for that. I think that's great. But see, if you're trying to do this as let's put in place this new process, and we're going to do this until the cows come home or until we have some good numbers, people are not going to necessarily go for that.
Well, to me, this is a little bit of a feedback mechanism. Learning is ongoing. I propose there's a value to tracking that stuff, in an ongoing manner. I like to write stuff down. It's been proven to be effective. There's a lot of truth.
That's why our team loves having you around, Jason.
You
love doing that.
Because I write all the stuff down for them. That's
exactly.
So effective. Yes, so I get role overloaded all the time. I love it. Wonderful.
I would like to tell you guys briefly about a game that I have used to demonstrate the effectiveness of role overloading. It's a relatively simple game. It involves two teams, hopefully of equal size, and you have a prepared set of words, and each member of the team has to write down some number of these words, and you give them a card, and it has the words that the person has to write down. For instance, Jason, you may have to write down stranger and xylophone. Okay? Some of those letters you are allowed to write with your right hand. Some of those letters can only be written by a specialist on the team, on your team.
Well, that sounds like a pretty rigid work breakdown structure, John.
It would be just like I only develop and you only test.
Oh, yes. Rigid roles and a rigid work breakdown structure. Wonderful.
And so you have to pass your work off to someone else to complete your words for you. And then on Lee's team, he has to write down these exact same words, except when Lee comes to the special letters that have to be written down by a specialist, Lee writes them down with his non-dominant hand. And while Lee is not good at writing with his non-dominant hand, he is still able to make the letters and construct the word. It's not with the same level of quality that Lee would be able to do if he was able to write all of his letters down with his dominant hand, but he's still able to accomplish the task. And every time, the team that is able to use both their right and their left hand to write down their words, they finish in about half the time as the team that has to use the specialist to complete their words.
What's funny is I'll show you, we actually, shameless plug time, at the, I think it was the February 2013 meeting of the St. Louis Limited Work in Progress Society. We actually did that game, a little different variation on it, but we talked at length about measurement and how to measure cycle time, context changes, and then even talking about sometimes, in a lot of organizations, if you look at a big picture, you have a subject matter expert, a SME. And they always have a very high cost. And so when you institutionalize the need for that subject matter expert to do specific tasks, your cost for production dramatically go up. So that's a great activity. And there's an opportunity, if you want to learn more about metrics, to add a layer of metrics on top of that to talk about a measurement system that you can use to better improve that scenario.
So I want to add that I am not against role overloading from that respect. I think it's a good idea. My point is that you are going to get much better at writing with your left hand, or non-dominant hand in my case, the left hand. If I do that on a daily basis, if I can somehow work that into my process, then I'm going to get better at it. So it shouldn't be an exception thing if that's something that you really want your team to do all the time. Build it into the process. So,
or what I'm going to tap into, Lee, is this fact, and again, it's yoga night. So again, if you ever go out and experience yoga is a practice. It's about getting better, iterating, doing experiments. Agile is the same thing. So do experiments, but at the same time, look at Agile as a practice whereby you should be doing things through time to get better and really add layers of maturity or complexity, whatever you want to call it, or skill on top of that. And if you're not doing things to facilitate that, I'd encourage you to adopt the practice mindset for how you're going about software development in an Agile mindset.
I think what you're really getting at is a constant mindset of improvement, right? In general.
Yeah, it is. But to me, this idea of a practice. So some people say in the enterprise space, this idea, we want to have a practice. We want to have a SOA practice. We want to have a mobility practice. Sometimes you even have a center of excellence in your practice, to kind of, ensure that you're doing that. And I know Amos hates the center of excellence analogy, but there's a lot of value to saying, hey, here's how we're working to promote maturity of how we practice and do Agile. And over time, you should be experimenting so that you can be better at role overloading.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I even think that your metrics gathering can actually facilitate that as long as it's done in an automatic way. But I also don't necessarily want to experiment on something that at least the team feels like there isn't a pain point. But there's always something that you can find a pain point or something that the team wants to improve on, and then have an experiment to figure out how to make that better. But I don't want to just throw out things for the sake of it.
So let me ask this. Let me try to flush the yoga analogy, and maybe we make this the last thing to go full circle. So if you go to yoga, or if you work out anywhere, okay, you go in and there's typically some basic things that are repetitive, that are the same, that are constants, that don't change. And you use that to kind of, effectively warm your body up to where you can do more advanced things and try some experiments. What's the parallel of that in the Agile mindset?
What's the parallel of?
Yeah, kind of like the basics, like the basic things you kind of do to get started. So, you go to you're not a yoga guy. You go to the gym, you want to lift weights, okay? If you go in the back of the gym and try to lift the big heavy bar up without warming up, you're going to get hurt. So you got to go warm up for that.
Agile calisthenics.
I don't know. Maybe that's something that it breaks down because it's knowledge work and there isn't the need to have that idea of basic practice. Or maybe the simple answer is that's saying that, hey, you know how to, you as a member of a team, as a T-shaped person, you know what the basic engineering and process disciplines are within the Agile. You know how to write tests. You know how to make the build work. You know how to use your mocking framework, whatever they are. And so because you have that base skill set and you keep that current to where you can be effective at it, that enables you to do experiments. Doesn't work out well for a workout analogy because you don't have to warm up writing your tests every morning. You just have to know how to do it. So maybe
I think the key is a balance, though. And I think I'll just leave it at that. I think the key is really just a balance. You can't do, you have to have the right amount of repetitive stuff that you do all the time and the right amount of new stuff that you're trying. You can't do too much of one or the other.
So my free plug for the night here is we all know Mr. Jim Benson got very famous and probably rich off of his lean coffee idea. Let's have meetings in the morning, drink coffee, and take a little comment board and talk about lots of great topics. It's lots of fun. If you've never tried it, check it out. Lean coffee. Thank you, Jim Benson. Lee is going to create Agile calisthenics, and I'm so excited to see what that entails. That will be the next big thing, I'm sure, John.
Hey, that was my idea.
Oh, well, then you could do it. You could do it. I'll just show up with my dumbbells and my yoga pants, and I'll bring a shake weight down.
Can I show up in just my overalls? And
that's fine. You get to shake weight, Lee. You get to shake weight. You get to do the shake weight all night long.
I just want a shake. Chocolate maybe.
Oh, okay.
Well, this has been very enlightening for me, guys. I appreciate your differing opinions and the full conversation and discussion around this topic. But unfortunately, we do have to wrap it up for this evening. I think
Audience is overloaded on roll overloading.
I think we should take this up and talk about this again in the future, because I think that there is a chance for us to experience some more stuff and keep our eye on this and see how it progresses in our personal lives as well as on the teams that we participate in. And I'd like to get some different opinions from maybe folks like Amos and Nate Mackey and Matt Corwell as well, just to spice it up. So let's do our picks. And Jason Tice, you already gave us the Mr. Benson lean coffee pick.
Oh, I've given you a bunch. And of course, Lean Kit rocks. If you need a combo, go check it out. You can use it for free, or you can subscribe to a variety of operation plans. They have a great API too if you want to pull their data down. So, but real picks though. Something I've been walking around that I picked up actually at the Agile Games Conference this year back in April. Seems like forever. There's a website, agilekindergarten.com. It's done by Karen Fabaza. She's out of Boston. It's a blog, talks about kind of a kindergarten or even a very simple view of Agile. But she actually wrote a picture book. So I have kids. The picture book is called A to XP. It has a letter of the alphabet, a visual picture, and a very simple definition of a bunch of Agile principles. And it goes through the whole alphabet. Yes, you can teach it to your kids. And of course, I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. They both know it. But it's also been proven to be a great talking point book for people who are just getting started. And it's a great read. You can even use it in retros. You open the book, you pick a letter, and you talk about how that is relevant for the team. So there's lots of great things there. Check it out, agilekindergarten.com. You have to buy the book from the website. It's like $12. The last thing that I'll throw out there, just to plug it, like we talk about today, mobprogramming.org. If you haven't tried a mob, I'd encourage you to try one. Also sometimes called a swarm. Try it. Let us know what you think about it. If you think it's a waste of time, awesome. If you think it changes your life, let us know about it. It'd be fun to talk about, get some feedback from what other people are doing out there across the Agile community at large.
Good picks, Jason. A couple of things. I'm not sure it's the same thing as a swarm, at least not in my mind. So I want to throw my opinion out there that I don't believe mob programming and swarming are the same thing.
I think that's a future topic.
Very good.
For the podcast.
The other topic is you should show Dave Elfenbaum this agilekindergarten.com, because I know that he had this idea more than a year ago to create a to Z book on Agile. He'll probably be very disappointed to find out that someone else beat him to it.
Well, put it this way. It's a picture book, and if you haven't ever had to buy books for your kids and gone to the bookstore and looked at them all, there are lots of board books out there. We could make another board book.
Sure. Lee, what's your pick for this evening?
So my pick is one that I've been trying to increase my ability at being a retrospective facilitator. And I have found the tastycupcakes.org website to be a fantastic resource. I don't know if anyone else has plugged this previously on this show. I wouldn't be surprised. But a great resource for those that are wanting to do activities in retrospectives and are just coming up with a blank on whatever it might be. Tasty Cupcakes has a great list of things.
That's great, Lee. I look forward to using this in the future. I like to always spice it up and use something different in the retrospectives, because you don't want to get into too much of a rut, and having a different approach or a game or a technique or something always helps keep things a little interesting. So my pick tonight is Asana.com. This is a task management tool. I think I'll call it a task management tool, though I don't have a lot of experience with it. It's certainly not something as full-featured as Rally or version 1, and it's more lightweight, similar to what you might find from Jason's friends over at Lean Kit. But it's not Kanban specific, and it's really not specific to any discipline.
So, John, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is it Anna, like you pronounce it, or is it asana, like from Sanskrit?
It is ASANA.
Because if you've never looked what the definition of asana is, it is a yoga term. So it goes full circle tonight. Oh.
Wow. So are you able to speak in Sanskrit, as it were, Jason?
I know Sanskrit, but I mean, typically asana in Sanskrit it's a seated position. It's a very basic position in yoga. Don't know if that's what they're going for with their product, but just kind of a funny analogy given some of the other comments this evening.
Thank you. So check that out, Asana or asana.com. I'm not sure what the pronunciation is, but that would be really cool if it was tied to yoga and somehow we brought it all back full circle. All right. Well, guys, that's all we have time for tonight with our discussion and our picks. So let me go ahead and give each of you a moment to tell people where they can find you on the internet. Jason, where can people find you?
Nowhere. That's horrible, but I need to change it. If you could follow me on Twitter at Tice Thoughts, and that's probably if you want to debate things like Scrum versus Agile or whatever, that could be a lot of fun.
And Dr. Lee, where can people find you on the internet?
I'm at agileatheist.blogspot if you want to get my blog, or Agile Atheist on Twitter.
Very good. And you guys can find me at JC Sextro on Twitter or on my website at johnsextro.com. We also have a website and a Twitter handle for the podcast. Our Twitter handle for the podcast is at This Agile Life. And as I said at the beginning of the show, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to have you tweet with us on Twitter, and we'd love a rating on iTunes if you have the time. You can find the show notes for this show and all the episodes of This Agile Life at thisagilelife.com. Thanks for listening, and keep living this Agile life.